In the flat stretches of southern Missouri, where the fields roll like old scars, and the soil holds more than just seeds, there once stood a place that promised to turn troubled girls into godly women. At least, that's what the pamphlet said. The locals didn't call it by its full name. They simply called it the house. And if you asked too many questions about it, they'd either stop talking or start praying. Harvest House for Misplaced Girls was founded in the spring of 1884, less than 20 years after the Civil War had torn the country in half. It was built on land no one wanted, drought-worn, locust-scorched 10 miles from the nearest township. But that didn't matter. Land was cheap, and souls were cheaper. The founder, Adelaide Crane, was a widow from Chicago who claimed God had spoken to her during a fever. She said he told her to gather the broken blossoms of womanhood and bind them with labor. She arrived with funding from the Missouri Women's Benevolent Society and a handwritten charter that gave her full authority to detain girls of moral ambiguity and social noncompliance without trial or consent. They came from all over. Some were sent by church elders. Some were sent by local sheriffs who didn't want to deal with girls who refused obedience. Others were placed there by their own families for being pregnant or mouthy, or simply inconvenient. Ages ranged from 8 to 17. Most arrived with no suitcase. Many didn't even know where they were going until the cart stopped at the iron gate. On paper, Harvest House was a Christian work farm designed to instill disciplined decency and domestic skill. In reality, it was a correctional labor colony that fed its bounty not back into the girls' futures, but into a growing network of state-funded eugenics programs and private agricultural contracts. But we didn't know that at the time. Or maybe people did, but chose not to ask. There are no official photos of the original Harvest House. What remains are sketches, insurance diagrams, and oral accounts pieced together by researchers, whispered by nurses, and etched into the journals that would surface over 100 years later, stitched in red thread buried in a hole behind a dying strawberry patch. But we'll get to that. What matters now is this: from 1884 to 1905, over 312 girls passed through the gates of Harvest House. Of those, fewer than 60 are confirmed to have left under their own name. The rest were renamed, reassigned, or simply erased. Their bodies were never found. Their stories never told. Until now. This is not a tale of a single bad woman or one broken building. This is a story about a system, about obedience dressed as charity, about discipline used as disguise, and about how one girl, one thread, and one voice might finally break the silence. But before we descend into the cold stone corridors of Harvest House, you need to understand the world that built it. In the aftermath of the Civil War, America was a nation reeling from death, from guilt, from moral confusion. Entire towns had been razed, thousands of women widowed, children orphaned. There was no language for trauma, no word for depression, only melancholia and moral deficiency. And for girls, especially girls from the wrong class, the wrong color, or the wrong family, there was only one solution: reform through labor. Adelaide Crane believed she was saving these girls. She preached from the porch every Sunday, her voice clear across the fields, quoting Proverbs and Leviticus, twisting scripture into chains. Her philosophy was simple: a wild vine bears no fruit until it is bound to the post. She built that philosophy into every brick of the house. The dormitories were lined with narrow beds and barred windows. The fields were divided into strict rows: corn, tobacco, strawberries, cabbage. Each girl was assigned a crop, a name, and a punishment cycle. They were forbidden from speaking before noon, forbidden from writing without permission, forbidden from looking directly into the eyes of staff. And most chilling of all, they were forbidden from remembering who they used to be. Every new girl was renamed, not with the number, but with the name of a plant. Fern, daisy, iris, clover. They were told their old names were tainted, that only rebirth through obedience would grant them worth. And if they resisted, there was a place for that too. It was called the Quiet Orchard. No maps to show it, no documents listed. But every surviving account references it. A low building past the rows of dying strawberries, always locked, always cold, where the air smelled of burnt linen and iron. But we'll come back to that. For now, remember this before it was a graveyard of names, before it was a field of vanished girls. Harvest House was just a promise to make girls good. And nothing is more dangerous than the belief that pain is righteous. Before the first crop was planted, before the first girl was renamed, before the soil even settled around the new bricks of Harvest House, there was a document. It wasn't a government charter. It wasn't scripture. It was a handwritten manifesto, a 36-page booklet bound in stitched linen titled The Doctrine of Useful Redemption, written entirely in Adelaide Crane's careful slanted hand. The original copy has never been found. What we know of it comes from fragments recovered during a barn fire in 1981, preserved in church archives under historical memoranda, and mentioned in a 1907 deposition by a dismissed field instructor. But the fragments are enough. They describe not just a philosophy, but a blueprint, a system, a moral reprogramming process cloaked in the language of purity, virtue, and salvation. Adelaide believed that fallen girls were not inherently evil, but functionally misaligned. Their bodies were unruly, their desires unsanctified, their instincts untrained. She saw them not as children, but as wayward instruments in need of recalibration. In her words, a girl is a vessel. If she has poured herself into sin, she must be emptied. If she resists being emptied, she must be broken. The Lord only fills what is hollowed first. She described 4 phases of redemptive correction: severance, the removal of all former identity, name, history, language, and lineage; submission, total compliance with routine, rise at 4 a.m., prayer at dawn, labor until dusk, silence until granted speech; stabilization, chemical or procedural intervention for intractable instincts; sanctification, reassignment into productive usefulness, either as house staff, farm leaders, or if judged unfit; quiet ascension, a phrase that appears nowhere else in Missouri reform literature. This wasn't rehabilitation, it was reconditioning. Girls who cried at night were marked as soul in upheaval. Those who failed to meet harvest quotas were placed on fasting days, which often meant nothing but water and prayer for up to 72 hours. Girls who tried to run were not punished publicly, they simply vanished. Their bed stripped, their name reassigned. And yet Adelaide framed it all as mercy. Better to lose 1 year in the field than a lifetime in the flesh, she wrote. Better to break a girl early than let her break the world later. It is here that we first encounter the garden class as an internal categorization system used to determine a girl's level of reformability. Garden class, a meek, pliable, capable of public reassignment. Garden class B, resistant, undisciplined, or exhibiting signs of emotional decay. Garden class C, unreformable. Reserved for sterilization or quiet ascension. The codes were never spoken aloud. They were stitched into the collars of the girls' aprons using matching thread so as not to arouse suspicion. But survivors recall the shame of realizing your thread didn't match your neighbor's. One girl, who would later be identified only as Iris Bell, wrote in her thread journal, "The red thread means I am not for saving. The blue means you'll work the fields. The white means you cry quiet." Adelaide didn't act alone. She trained a staff of 6 women and 2 men, many of them from religious seminaries or nursing homes for unmarried women. They were told this was soul medicine. They were given quotas for harvest output and behavior reports. They were rewarded for silence. Harvest House was not just a building. It was an ecosystem, a factory of quiet obedience. And as the years passed, its efficiency grew. Contracts were signed with nearby canning companies. Textile buyers paid premiums for the thread dyed on site made by girls who weren't allowed to speak while weaving. A grant was issued by the Missouri Eugenics Board in 1886 under the title Study in Applied Temperament Correction via Controlled Population Decline. The money flowed. The fields expanded. And Adelaide's doctrine spread quietly to other homes bearing different names but identical philosophies. But only Harvest House left behind the threads. Long after the windows were boarded and the gates rusted shut, those threads would resurface in the hem of a child's apron, unearthed by a storm in the lining of a quilt, never finished in the seams of a prayer cushion hidden in an attic. Each one carrying words not meant to be read, only survived. Like this one, I was Fern. But that is not my name. My name is buried in the earth. If you find this thread, pull it. Pull it and do not stop. So we keep pulling. Because behind every doctrine built to erase the girl is a girl who remembered anyway. Harvest House didn't have guards. It didn't need them. It had rules, schedules, walls. But most of all, it had silence. Not silence as in absence of noise, but a structured weaponized silence designed to suppress memory, inhibit connection, and convert pain into ritual. Every girl arrived stripped of her real name, her real clothing, and her real identity. Within 12 hours, she was given a linen uniform, one thin blanket, and a name drawn from a rotating list of acceptable flora. Names like Iris, Fern, Dandelion, Violet, Ash, Clover. Names that were gentle on the tongue and easy to forget. A white tag was sewn into each girl's sleeve, color-coded to match her assigned garden class. They were told the color had no meaning. That was a lie. The staff knew, and soon the girls did too. Daily life in Harvest House followed a strict timetable, 4:00 a.m., wake by bell, no speaking permitted, 4:30 a.m., morning field labor or floor scrubbing, 7:00 a.m., cold wash and prayer repetition minimum, 18 verses, 8:00 a.m., 6:00 p.m., rotational labor canning sewing, dyeing firewood collection. 6:15 p.m., inspection. 7:00 p.m., silent supper. 8:00 p.m., scripture review. 9:00 p.m., lights out. Silence enforced. Violation of the silence rule. Whether a whispered joke, a sob during supper, or even a sneeze was met with discipline ranging from food denial to prayer confinement, a form of locked isolation in the dry pantry with a single passage from Leviticus written on the walls. The disobedient shall not inherit the promise. Girls were rarely beaten. Not because the staff were merciful, but because violence left marks. Silence didn't. The true punishment was internal. The loss of language, the loss of self. One survivor would later write, "I forgot how to say my own name aloud. Not because they stopped me, because they made me ashamed to try." Supervision came not just from adults, but from within. Older girls, those who'd survived 3 years or more, were promoted to sister overseers. They wore darker uniforms and carried ledgers. They were responsible for enforcing prayer quotas, reporting insubordination, and conducting random virtue checks in the sleeping quarters. Some did it because they believed. Others did it because it kept them from being reassigned to the orchard at night. That's how control works. It makes survivors into sentinels. The house itself was built like a maze of obedience. narrow corridors, thin floors, doors with inward-only locks. The chapel sat in the center of the main structure, its wooden cross nailed into the stone not for worship, but for surveillance. From the choir loft, a staff member could see into every main hall. The kitchen had no knives. The sewing room had no mirrors. The pantry had only a single light high in the ceiling that flickered during storms, something the girls came to fear more than thunder. And then there was the orchard wing. It was never called that on any blueprint, but the name passed from girl to girl like a whispered dare. Technically, it was the auxiliary building, half greenhouse, half drying barn, where strawberries and medicinal herbs were cultivated. In reality, it was a site of isolation and compliance testing. Girls who broke down emotionally or relapsed into sinful behavior, meaning crying, resisting, or speaking in dreams, were sent there. For days, sometimes weeks, always returned thinner, quieter, and sometimes not returned at all. One of the few remaining receipts from the orchard supply inventory lists the following 3 doses: tincture of belladonna, 7 iron clasps, 2 units cotton gag wrap 1 ledger. Entry: violet, 4 days, minimal resistance, compliant upon return. That word again, compliant. Compliance wasn't just the goal, it was the currency of worth. Girls who smiled on command, who completed harvest quotas, who recited scripture without pause. They were granted small allowances, a piece of fruit, a warmer blanket, permission to write a letter that was never sent. But even letters were pre-written, copied from templates. Dear sponsor, I am well. The Lord has changed me. I pray for you every morning. No girl ever used her own words, and if she did, the letter was burned. By the time most girls reached their second year, they no longer asked for books or combs or music. They asked only to remain in the dorms, not be sent to the orchard. And Adelaide Crane saw this as progress. In one journal entry recovered from her personal effects, she wrote, "They are quieter now, softer. They kneel without being told." A field does not protest the plow once it understands the harvest. She believed this was God's work. But it wasn't God who made the floorboards creak at night. It wasn't scripture that erased a name. And it wasn't grace that kept the orchard door locked from the outside. It was a system, and it ran on silence. The year was 1886. Just 2 years after Harvest House opened its doors and began collecting broken girls from across Missouri, a letter arrived bearing the seal of the Missouri Board of Public Health and Temperament Correction, a name that would later be replaced in public records with a more palatable title, the Missouri Eugenics Board. At the time, eugenics wasn't yet a dirty word. It was spoken in state houses and seminaries as a science of betterment. To those in power, it was the promise of a healthier future. To those on the margins, it was a death sentence disguised as salvation. Harvest House was seen as a model institution, efficient, orderly, and blessedly quiet. Its records showed marked behavioral improvements, low escape rates, high productivity, and most importantly, complete institutional compliance. That last detail made it perfect for what the board had in mind, in exchange for additional funding and medical support. Adelaide Crane agreed to participate in what was called a longitudinal study in the prevention of undesirable reproductive inheritance. The language was sterile. The intent was not. The program targeted girls in Garden Class B, those deemed resistant, erratic, or prone to moral relapse. Many of these girls were survivors of abuse. Many had mental illness. Some were simply spirited. All were seen as unfit for motherhood. Under the study, girls were administered hormonal stabilizers, liquid tonics mixed into meager meals said to reduce hysteria. In reality, they were early chemical sterilants laced with high doses of mercury chloride, carbolic acid, and sometimes tinctures of lead. No consent was sought. No symptoms were documented. No deaths were ever officially linked, but some did die, quietly, in the orchard, in the bathhouse, in the chapel pews where they'd been left to pray through the purge. One former staff member under oath in a sealed 1907 inquiry recalled a phrase often spoken in the evenings after dosing. By morning, she will be calm. By next spring, she will be clean. There are no formal medical records from this period. The board destroyed them. What we have instead are receipts, shipping logs, and the testimonies of girls who managed somehow to remember. One such girl was Iris Bell. We'll talk more about her soon. But in her thread journal, stitched into the hem of a hand towel found beneath a collapsed cellar beam, she wrote, "They say the blue vial makes you still. They say it helps you think better. But I forgot my sister's face today, and I used to dream in color. Now I only dream in white." After 6 months of trials, the Missouri Eugenics Board issued a glowing report praising Harvest House as a sterile site of high potential for behavioral control and generational risk mitigation. In that same year, the program was expanded. Girls no longer had to be Garden Class B to be evaluated. Any girl who stuttered, who questioned scripture, who menstruated too early, who asked about her mother, any of them could be reassigned to Procedure Room 2. The room didn't exist on any blueprint, but references to it appear in procurement records. Gauze shipments, steel clamp deliveries, an invoice for sanitation solution surgical grade. Procedure Room 2 was located behind the root cellar, accessed through a false panel and locked from the outside. Inside, there were no windows, only a chair and a drain. One girl's note, burned around the edges but still legible, was found hidden inside the binding of an old hymnal in 2003. It read, "I heard Clover screaming through the floor. They told us she was taken to learn baking, but no girl comes back with stitches that deep. Adelaide Crane did not see herself as cruel. She believed utterly that she was serving the future, that the girls under her roof were vessels for reform or refuse to be cleared." In a speech delivered to the Women's Temperance Guild in 1887, she stated the soul is not always inherited. Sometimes it must be cultivated. And some soil, I'm afraid, is barren by nature. Harvest House was no longer a reform home. It was a machine, a testing ground, a sorting facility for which girls deserved lineage and which should end with them. And so they ended them, not always with blood, sometimes with silence, sometimes with gaslight, sometimes with white powder stirred into gray gruel and a prayer for obedience whispered over a still-breathing body. But always, always with the belief that what they were doing was holy. This was not punishment. This was policy. It began with strawberries, or rather what used to be strawberries, now just a wild tangle of thorny runners and rotted vines creeping over what remained of the back fields. In 2003, the property once known as Harvest House was purchased by a local couple hoping to turn the land into an heirloom orchard. They'd heard the legends, but they'd also heard the land was cheap. On the third day of clearing brush behind the root cellar, the husband's shovel struck something solid. He assumed it was the old stone, but what he dug up wasn't stone. It was a bundle of fabric wrapped in waxed oilcloth buried about 2 feet down beneath the weeds. Inside were strips of linen aged to the color of dust, each one stitched not with patterns, but with words. Not written. Stitched. In blood-colored thread looped with frantic precision, every letter consistent in size, every line deliberate tight like they had to be. The bundle contained 12 strips each roughly the length of a child's forearm, rolled tight and bound with what looked like a braid of hair. Human hair. At first, they couldn't read the words. The thread had faded to rust, and the fabric was brittle. But with the help of textile conservators and ultraviolet imaging, the messages began to emerge. They weren't diary entries, they were confessions. Maps, memorials, wills. each one written by a girl who'd been silenced but refused to forget. The first decipherable piece read, "They made me forget my name." So I stitched it here. Iris, that is mine. If they unthread me, pull me back together. Iris, the name would surface again and again. Further pieces revealed fragments of a timeline, harvest rotations, prayer punishments, blue vial, days. Some contained drawings in thread, crude outlines of floor plans, stitched arrows pointing to orchard stillroom, and no return. One piece simply said, "The red thread is what they cannot burn." We used it from the dye room stolen at night. One thread for each girl lost. This bundle would come to be known as the Red Thread Ledger. Not a book, not a journal, but a testimony silent and stitched. Linen wasn't allowed in the dormitories. Neither were needles, which meant these had been sewn in secret, perhaps in the orchard wing, perhaps at night in the dark using stolen scraps and trembling fingers. Why thread? Because writing was forbidden, because paper could be confiscated. But a hem, a lining, a cuff, or apron seam that could hide something. Investigators found traces of thread-stitched messages in other parts of the property, the underside of a dresser drawer, a loose stone behind the chapel, the hem of a doll's dress stuffed into a broken heating pipe. All signed the same way: Fern. Violet, Iris, Ash, Clover, Marigold. Names that weren't names, but code names, girl names, burial names, and always stitched last in faint red, "If you forget me, you keep her alive." These girls had no voice, so they made one, with needle and thread and memory and grief. One conservator described the feeling of touching the linen. It's not just cloth. It pulses, like something still wants to be heard. In total, 39 distinct pieces of thread writing have since been recovered. Each one adds another layer to the buried truth. They confirm timelines. They reference staff members by initials. They list names, real names of girls who were taken for Blue Vial Day and did not come back. And more chillingly, they suggest the burials were not accidents. One line stitched in uneven script reads, "Beneath the drowsy strawberries there are 17. We planted them after." This was not rumor. This was record. Made in secret. Preserved in earth. Unstoppable by silence or fire. The Red Thread Ledger became the foundation of the reinvestigation into Harvest House's true purpose. Not just a place of reform, but of chemical sterilization, psychological erasure, and quiet disposal. And at the center of it all was Iris Bell, the first girl whose name made it out, the girl who remembered, the girl who stitched the silence into words. Her name was Iris Bell, or at least that's the name she stitched. We don't know when she arrived at Harvest House. There are no intake records from the year 1887. That year, nearly all ledgers were destroyed in a barn fire, or more likely destroyed after a barn fire was staged. But we do know this: Iris was real. We know it because of her thread, because her name appears not just once, but 12 times in separate locations across the property, because 3 different recovered linens bear phrases like, "Iris is the one who remembers." Follow Iris's stitch, and you will find the orchard. If I forget, my sister Iris will not. And we know her because of the dress log, a surviving administrative ledger detailing uniform assignments discovered in a sealed crate in 2009. There, on page 42, a single line, assigned linen number 84. New designation, Iris. Former designation withheld. That's how they recorded girls not as people, but as textile entries. But Iris resisted. Not in ways loud or visible. Those girls were sent to the orchard and never came back. No, Iris resisted the only way possible inside a system designed to erase you by remembering, by writing in silence, by sewing her memory into the seams. Fragments of her thread journal reveal something most disturbing, a slow fading, not of the body, but of the mind. A systematic unraveling of memory and language likely caused by the chemical tonics administered in the orchard. One stitched entry reads, "They gave me the blue again." It burned behind my teeth. I forgot what my sister looked like. I forgot what month it is. But I remember the sound of Clover crying. I remember that I am Iris, another stitched crookedly along the edge of what may have once been a kerchief. My dreams are white. My thoughts feel far. But I tied the thread to my finger, and when I forget, I pull. From these pieces, a portrait emerges not just of a girl surviving, but of a girl fighting memory loss as though it were a second captivity. Her entries shift from factual to poetic, from instructional to pleading. Sometimes she leaves herself notes, "If you find this, it is yours. If you can stitch, you can speak. If you are afraid, so was I, and I lived until the frost." Then there's the most telling fragment found wrapped in what remained of a cotton apron sleeve hidden behind the chapel's crumbling foundation. The stitching is loose, almost frantic. As if done in a rush, they say, "I belong to the orchard now, that my blood is not for blooming, that my roots are wrong, but I have thorns, I have needles, and I remember." What happened to Iris? We don't know. No grave has ever been located. No descendant has come forward. But what we do have are her words, her stitches, her resistance. The red thread became her voice, her body, her gravestone. And in many ways, her legacy is not just in what she recorded, but in what she inspired. Other names began to appear in the recovered cloths. Ash, fern, clover, violet, each with messages echoing Iris's call to remember. They created without ever meeting a network of memory, a counter-history, one not told by the state, but by the silenced. Iris Bell may never have escaped Harvest House in body, but she escaped its design. She broke its silence. She taught others how to stitch. And that may be why, when the state tried to raze the old orchard field in 2005 to make way for a biofuel expansion site, the project was mysteriously halted. An anonymous envelope had arrived at the county records office. Inside were photos of the red thread fragments, a linen scrap, and a single note. "You buried her once. Don't do it again." Her name was Clover. That's how she was listed in the dress log. Uniform 109, Garden Class B, orchard clearance pending. But her real name? We wouldn't learn that for over a century. In 1989, a now-defunct Catholic-run care home in Kansas released dozens of case files as part of a closure settlement. Among them was a thin, yellowing envelope marked Witness Recrane Agricultural Facility, 1891. Inside was a single handwritten testimonial by a nurse named Lydia Meeks, who had worked at Harvest House for less than 5 months. She had left abruptly, citing spiritual conflict and irregularities in treatment. But what the letter described was not irregularity, it was a system of engineered disappearance. Nurse Meeks wrote of a girl known as Clover, a slight child, barely 14, quiet, sun-damaged hands, a fear of open doors. She arrived in the spring of 1889 and was assigned to dying duty. By summer, she was being prepared for orchard adjustment. But Clover didn't comply. Not fully. She didn't fight, didn't scream. She listened, she watched, and most dangerously, she remembered. According to Meeks, Clover began hiding scraps of thread. She worked late shifts, and sometimes when she thought no one was watching, she whispered prayers with the wrong names. Not saints, girls. Meeks wrote, She would say, "Iris, stay with me. Ash, don't fall. Violet, hold the stitch." I thought she was mad. But one day she left a square of linen on my tray. It read, "Do not turn the soil behind the strawberries." Meeks didn't know what it meant until she saw what the orchard staff called cleaning day. That was the day the orchard gates stayed locked. The day girls didn't return. The day fire was lit in the old smokehouse furnace, even though no meat had been delivered in weeks. 2 weeks later, Clover disappeared. The record says reassigned. Garden duty extended. No further action. But Meeks received a note. No envelope. Just a thread-stitched scrap under her door. I left the ledger. It's where the roots are softest. Don't forget my sisters. Don't say my name where they can hear it. Meeks left Harvest House that night. Never returned, but she took that scrap with her. She kept it hidden for over 50 years, and when she finally spoke of it, the world had already forgotten Harvest House even existed, until 2003, when the first red thread ledger was found buried exactly where Clover had said. The strawberry patch had long since gone wild, but the soil was still soft, and beneath it 12 strips of stitched linen. Clover had buried them. She didn't escape over the fence. She escaped by preserving the truth, by leaving a map stitched in red for anyone who would listen. Further cross-referencing finally revealed her name, Clara Lovelace Barron, born 1875, Jackson County. Reported missing 1889. Never located. Until now. Clara Clover was never found by her family, but she found a way to outlive the place meant to erase her. Not with noise. Not with rebellion. But with thread. And that thread buried under frost and silence for over a century is now the very thing unspooling the Harvest House lie. She was not just the girl who got away. She was the one who refused to stay buried. The frost came early that year. By mid-November of 1892, the ground around Harvest House had already hardened. The orchard trees had gone brittle. The strawberry fields were bare. The breath of every girl left traces on the window glass like ghosts reaching for warmth. That week, 17 girls were reassigned to Garden Class B. 17. They were not all new arrivals. Some had been there for over a year. They weren't all defiant. They weren't all broken. But they had one thing in common. They were all, according to Adelaide Crane, influenced. By whom no name was spoken, but staff testimonies unearthed later would refer to a thread contagion. A quiet pattern among the girls sharing scraps, praying in pairs, humming during chores, mouthing names at night. One sister overseer wrote in a margin, "They are speaking through the seams. The red spreads like mold." On the evening of November 28, 1892, 17 girls were told to report to the chapel after supper. They were instructed to bring their linens for inspection. No one ever returned. No incident report was filed. No accident recorded. But days later, the orchard fire pit was lit for 3 consecutive nights. And for the first time in the Harvest House's history, the chapel was closed indefinitely due to structural damage. Staff were told to refer all inquiries to a new supervisor brought in by the Missouri Eugenics Board, a man listed in later court documents only as Dr. R.A.H. His specialty was silence. His methods left no visible mark. But the girls remembered, and one of them, Marigold, somehow survived long enough to stitch the truth. Her red thread scrap was found tucked inside the lining of a boot heel buried near the back fence. The stitching was rough, broken in places, but one phrase remained clear. "We were 17. They said it was a harvest." But no fruit ever bled like we did. There were blood traces found decades later beneath the chapel floorboards. tiny claw marks on the inside of the root cellar door, a broken length of iron with a tooth fragment still embedded in its rust. But no graves, no death records, just names on linens, and a date circled in a ledger margin, November 28th. All cleared. The few remaining girls who stayed on after that night reported a change in routine. Silence became stricter. Needles were counted nightly. No linens were issued for 2 weeks only, burlap sacks with initials stamped on the front. And still the girls stitched. They stitched with thread stolen from the dye room. They stitched their memories into hem sleeves, the backs of Bible bindings. One message, barely readable, likely done in candlelight, read, "If I am next, stitch me too. Let the frost keep me until she finds us. We don't know who she is." But perhaps it was Clover. Perhaps it was Iris. Perhaps it was whoever might live long enough to dig them up. What we do know is that after that winter, Harvest House began to empty. Funding quietly decreased. Staff were rotated out. The Missouri Eugenics Board changed its name to the Better Futures Commission. By 1894, the gates of Harvest House were padlocked. But the orchard remained. And beneath that orchard, beneath 17 unmarked shadows in the frost, was a history not erased. Just buried. Waiting. Harvest House did not fall by scandal. It was not shuttered by court order. There was no rescue raid, no headlines. It folded in silence, like a body curling in on itself when it knows death is coming. By 1893, something had changed. Not in the girls, in the staff. They began to resign, not in protest, but in fear. One by one, longtime overseers cited illness, spiritual unrest, or sudden relocation. 2 were admitted to sanitariums within a year. Another fled to Canada and was never heard from again. Why? Because the red thread was no longer just a message. It was an infestation. Small lengths began appearing in places they shouldn't. In the dining room sugar bin, in the seams of clean aprons never worn, tied around doorknobs in perfect silent bows, and in Adelaide Crane's room. According to a recovered letter written by her groundskeeper in early 1894, she would find it in her shoes and her hairbrush across her pillow like a warning. No matter how many times she burned it, the thread returned. Always red, always threaded through something she loved. Some said it was the girls, some said it was something else. The term contagion of conscience appears in the margins of a medical supply ledger. One page marked only with "she sews in her sleep" says names that don't belong to anyone breathing. Rumors spread that Adelaide stopped eating, that she forbade mirrors, that she burned her linens every night and demanded new ones by dawn. But the thread still came, and it wasn't just fabric anymore. In late spring, a sealed room in the East Wing was discovered to have been filled wall to wall with handwritten names, scrawled in chalk, in soot, on floorboards, on ceilings, over and over: Iris, Fern, Clover, Violet, Ash, Marigold. One name stood out, written larger than the others, circled in red chalk clover. The room was bricked shut the next day. After that, Adelaide stopped speaking during morning sermons. She refused to lead prayer. She dismissed the kitchen staff and took to cooking her own meals, which she often left untouched. A final, unsigned memo sent from the Missouri Eugenics Board that summer read, "The subject appears compromised. Phase out the Crane facility. No paper closure. Let the roots reclaim it." And so they did. By autumn, Harvest House was vacated. The girls were sent elsewhere, reassigned to other homes with new names and newer doctrines. The orchard was left to rot. The dye room collapsed in a lightning storm 2 weeks after the last girl departed. The chapel doors split from their hinges in the first frost. The house did not burn. It was never sold. It simply sank, into itself, into the ground, into silence. Locals avoided it. Children dared each other to touch its fence, but even they noticed, there's something about that place that don't want to be seen. Like it's trying to remember how to forget. No legal action was ever brought against Adelaide Crane. She vanished. Some say she changed her name. Some say she walked into the orchard and never came out. But 30 years later, in a charity shop in Osage Beach, a red thread-stitched handkerchief was found among a box of hymnals. It was signed A. Crane. I, too, remember now. In 2012, a preservation grant was awarded to the Missouri Historical Recovery Fund to document deteriorating 19th-century religious structures. One of the sites approved for exploration almost by accident was a crumbling, overgrown ruin listed simply as Crane Agricultural Facility. The locals knew it by another name, Harvest House. The structure was barely standing, its main roof had caved the orchard long since gone feral. But when ground-penetrating radar was used to map what was left of the foundations, a void was detected beneath the old dye room, a rectangular chamber. Unrecorded. Unreachable until they cleared the debris. And what they found, a door. Wooden. Rotted. Sealed shut with a rusted iron chain from the inside. It took nearly 6 hours to force open. Behind it lay a subterranean room no more than 12 by 12 feet. Walls lined with cracked tile. No windows, no air vents. And in the center, lit by a single shaft of sun from a broken beam above, a trunk. Black iron. Child-sized. Padlocked shut. The team expected bones, remains, maybe documents. They were wrong. Inside the trunk were 17 dolls, each hand-stitched faceless, their bodies made of burlap and stuffed with straw. 1 braid of hair wrapped in linen tied with red thread. 2 sets of shackles child-sized. And a bundle of cloth strips, thread-stitched journals. These were not the same red thread fragments found in the orchard. These were different, more formal, measured. They had been cataloged, numbered, and grouped by name. But what disturbed the researchers most wasn't the contents. It was the lining of the trunk. The entire interior had been stitched through. Its velvet was threaded with hundreds, possibly thousands of names. Some repeated, some crossed out, some ending in bleeding needle marks that had never been knotted. And in the very center, stitched in perfect symmetry, the house remembers, even when the state forgets. One anthropologist on site described the sensation of touching the trunk as wrong. It vibrated, she wrote. Not like a sound, like something unfinished, like something waiting to be opened the rest of the way. The trunk is now kept in a temperature-controlled vault, but even there it resists study. Every attempt to digitally scan the inside fails. The images blur, flicker, or return corrupted. Attempts to radiocarbon date the thread come back inconclusive. And once during a recorded archival session, one of the dolls was found moved, shifted to face the opposite direction. No one had touched it. The room had been sealed. But the tape shows it clearly. The doll turned toward the door. Whatever Harvest House was meant to forget, it didn't. Whatever it buried, it kept. And whatever was kept is still there. Waiting. They called her Marigold, but that wasn't her name. That's how the thread records her, how she recorded herself. Her linen strip was longer than most, nearly 4 feet, with densely packed stitching from edge to edge. Unlike the fragmented scraps of iris or clover marigolds, was whole. Deliberate, almost ceremonial. It had been wrapped carefully in muslin bound in a knot of red silk. The first line was not a confession. It was a warning. If this is found, then the house is not dead. And if the house is not dead, you must not listen to it. You must only listen to me. Her stitching was sharp-angled, like small blades. Some letters were inverted, almost coded, suggesting she feared someone might intercept it. What followed was not a diary. It was a death rite. But not for her. For Harvest House. She wrote of the winter after the 17 were taken, how the chapel was sealed, how the orchard trees began to split at the trunks, how at night the floorboards of the dormitories creaked in rhythm as if someone or something was walking in circles beneath them. We heard prayers we didn't say. We smelled smoke with no fire, and one by one the names we stitched began to unthread themselves. Girls began forgetting again, but not in the dull, drugged way of the blue vials. This time it was different. They forgot each other's faces, forgot how to say their own names. Some forgot how to sleep blinking endlessly until their bodies collapsed. Marigold wrote, "We were not alone. The house had turned inward, and it was remembering." She described one night when she woke to the sound of tearing linen, only to find that her own bedding had unraveled thread by thread into a perfect circle around her bed. In the center, a name, Iris, stitched in red but not by her hand. She was gone, Marigold wrote. But she was still writing. The message was clear: the house had not succeeded in erasure. The threads had found one another. She stitched, "We are the archive it cannot kill. We are the names it tried to burn." But ash remembers heat. Near the bottom of the linen, her message shifted from record to invocation. It was addressed not to the girls, not to staff, but to you, the reader, the digger, the listener. If you are unthreading this, you are now part of the ledger. The house has eyes. It will want you next. Not because you are guilty, but because you heard. Because now you cannot forget. The final words are stitched not in red, but in black. A single line stitched through so tightly the cloth buckled around it I buried the others. Not their bodies. Their names. Beneath the orchard they bloom still. This was not despair. This was resistance. Marigold had seen the house begin to collapse, and she chose to make sure its ruins could still speak. The linen now rests in a sealed frame at the Missouri State Archive. It is one of the few pieces that still loses small flecks of thread each year, as if unraveling itself one letter at a time. Some say it's the cloth decaying. Others believe Marigold is still writing. From beneath. From memory. From the place where 17 never left. The coordinates weren't written in numbers. They were drawn, stitched into the final inch of Marigold's linen, a tree, split at the base, its roots curling downward in the shape of a spiral. At first glance, it resembled just another orchard sketch, but a historian recognized the spiral shape for what it was: a top-down view of an old-style stone well. And there had been rumors. Children in the area had whispered for decades about the hole where the orchard breathes. A place older than Harvest House, older than Crane's farm. Some said it was a spring, others a burial shaft for animals. But when a small excavation team dug beneath the overgrown thicket near the northwest edge of the property, they found it. A circle of hand-laid stone no more than 3 feet wide, overgrown with moss and ivy. No pulley, no rope. Just an opening, perfectly dark and perfectly silent. Initial attempts to measure its depth failed. A flashlight dropped in revealed nothing. Even sonar gave inconsistent readings, as if the space shifted. Still, they lowered a camera. What they saw defied explanation. The walls were lined not with soil or stone, but with wooden slats like the inside of a coffin, turned vertical. Pinned to these slats at irregular intervals were small linen scraps. Hundreds. Some curled, some torn, but all stitched. Some in red, some in black, some with names, others with drawings, hands, eyes, doors, roots. At 37 feet down, the camera caught something else. A face. Not alive, not preserved, but carved into the stone itself. A woman's face, mouth open, eyes stitched shut. And beneath it, a phrase chiseled into the wall in English and Latin, "I remember you ego te memini." The footage ends with static. The camera cable, brand new, had corroded within 2 minutes of retrieval. The team never went back. But what's most chilling is what happened 2 days later. A researcher reviewing the marigold linen in storage noticed something had changed. A new line had been stitched into the hem impossibly from the inside. It read, "You found the mouth. Now do not feed it." No one could explain it. The linen had been sealed behind glass. No breach, no tampering, but the thread matched. It was Marigold's, and so they sealed the well, poured concrete, planted new soil, put up fencing. The area is now marked as a sensitive erosion zone. But those who were there, who saw the face, who read the stitched names spiraling into the earth, know what it was. Not a well, not a grave, a ledger. And Harvest House kept its books deep. Because you can erase files, burn buildings, rename institutions, but you cannot unstitch memory, not when it's buried with intention, not when it remembers you. They weren't part of the official team. Anna Rowe and Simon Greaves were independent researchers, freelance folklorists, nominally contracted to document oral histories surrounding Crane Farm. They weren't supposed to be at the dig site after hours. But curiosity doesn't clock out, and neither does guilt. Simon had been the one to spot the stitched face in the well footage. Anna had been the one who matched the Latin inscription to early eugenics literature. Both felt they'd seen only the surface. So, on the third night after the discovery, they came back. No lights, no team, just a crank harness, a rope ladder, and a decision they wouldn't tell anyone about, not yet. Anna descended first. 20 feet down, the air changed. It didn't feel underground. It felt contained, like the inside of a sealed throat. Simon followed. They didn't speak. At 32 feet, they sawed a bundle crudely wrapped in coarse linen suspended by rusted wire hooks between 2 slats of wood. It didn't sway, didn't move when touched, but the wire snapped the moment Anna cut it loose. They didn't unwrap it until they were above ground. They expected bone, or stitched linen, or worse. What they found was stranger. A child's dress completely intact, untouched by time. No blood, no tears, no mold. Just one name embroidered in red across the chest, Ash. And inside the pocket a small object wrapped in thread. When unspooled, it revealed a tooth. A human incisor, perfectly clean, and beneath it a rolled linen scrap. This was not like the others. It was not stitched with warnings. It was blank. Except for a single phrase in black thread at the bottom corner, "It's not hers, it's what she took with her." That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She kept the dress in a sealed box by her bed. By morning, her fingers were bleeding. She had been threading in her sleep. Red loops dug into the tips of her fingers, tiny, precise, as if following an invisible needle. Simon left town the next day. He never published. He never returned emails. But 3 weeks later, a package arrived at the Missouri State Archive. No return address. Inside, a photograph of the dress burned at the edges. A thumb drive containing corrupted footage labeled "She Moved." And a single line typed on a scrap of old punch card paper. You should not have taken her name out. Anna checked into a private facility soon after. She speaks only in thread counts now, listing numbers between breaths. And the dress gone. Not misplaced. Not stolen. It simply isn't where it was. The records show it was logged into climate storage. But when the drawer was opened weeks later, the only thing inside was a scrap of linen. She still fits in it, You shouldn't have called her up. Her name was Dr. Evelyn Mace. She specialized in Midwestern institutional history boarding schools, orphanages, reform homes. But she had never studied Harvest House, never applied for access, never requested files. She had no reason to, until one morning in 2023 when a package appeared on her porch, wrapped in brown cloth. No stamp. Inside, a folded linen square stitched in red. A map, not of Missouri, not exactly. The labels were hand-embroidered in a child's looping scrawl. But one landmark was unmistakable, the house that forgets, positioned exactly where Crane Agricultural Facility once stood. Dr. Mace assumed it was a hoax until she examined the fabric under magnification. The linen was late 19th century American domestic weave. The thread, vegetable-dyed, consistent with rural Missouri origin. But the kicker: the thread was looped through itself, not knotted, not tied, as if it had never been cut. The stitch had no beginning. She followed the map. What she found was impossible. Harvest House had been cleared, yes, the buildings long gone. But the orchard was back. 15 trees in 2 perfect rows. Every one of them the same height, same species, same twist at the base of the trunk like old roots reasserting themselves. But that wasn't what stopped her. It was the clothesline, strung between 2 trees, fraying, still holding, and pinned to it with rusted nails 7 linen scraps, swaying gently in wind that wasn't there. She walked the row, didn't touch, didn't breathe too loud. Each linen bore a single name, in red thread, perfectly preserved. Marigold clover, iris, ash fern, violet dawn. Dawn, a name that hadn't appeared in any Harvest House records, but one that, according to Dr. Mace's field notes, she had whispered in her sleep the night before. She left without taking anything, told no one. But 3 days later she discovered a new thread looped into the hem of her coat. Red, rough, still warm to the touch. She mailed it anonymously to the archive with a single line: "They're not buried anymore. The orchard is blooming. They never came for us." No gates opened. No names were cleared. The world kept spinning as if we were never there. Our stories were folded into silence, pressed between hymns, and discipline stitched shut with someone else's thread. But forgetting is not erasure. Something stayed beneath the floorboards inside the walls, quiet as breath, patient as root. They dismantled the rooms planted over our names, rewrote our purpose in kinder ink. Still, the seams held. You feel us in the hesitation before sleep, in the tug of a memory that doesn't belong to you, in a scrap of fabric you don't remember keeping. We weren't lost. We were buried under good intentions, not wayward, not ruined, not in need of saving. We witnessed, we remembered, and now we return not to haunt, but to be spoken. Every thread they pulled from us found its way back. Every silence they forced has begun to unravel. This was never about vengeance. It was about the archive, the ledger that breathes beneath your skin when you dare to name what was meant to be hidden. The house. It didn't curse. It carried. Too much sorrow, too many stories, built over a wound too wide to close. So we sealed it once, until you came and pulled it open again. You've read the names, you've seen the thread. You know the weight, and now you carry us. Hold steady, because if we are forgotten again, we won't return in dreams or soft-spoken warnings. We'll arrive as something sharper, something louder, something stitched into your own name before you ever speak it aloud.